Welcome to 1988, where a new decade of manga is fast approaching. Jump is going through some big changes, with new hits popping up right and left, and this year in particular was far too big. So many hits came out this year, as well as a lot of other interesting manga you can read. 8 in total manga have some kind of translation, which means I've had to do a lot more work than usual to get this video done. But it's been worth it because now I get to present to you one of the most jam-packed years of Jump history so far. So let's dive right into 1988. And to start off the year, we don't have a brand new manga, but the second part of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Battle Tendency. I've mentioned before, but JoJo wasn't actually separated originally when it ran in Weekly Shonen Jump, which is interesting as plenty of manga opted to reboot themselves with a part 2, like Jungle King Ta-chan, which we'll be talking about later on. Instead, Araki made a conscious choice to tell a different kind of story, an intergenerational one focusing on the Joestar's battle with the evils of the world, and this time we would follow Jonathan's grandson, Joseph. Battle Tendency is often viewed a lot more favourably than its prior part, with many citing Joseph as their favourite JoJo, and it's easy to see why. He opposes Jonathan in personality quite a bit, being a lot more loud, bombastic, and cheeky, and a bit more morally grey, but still good at heart. The setting as well has opened up from the quaint countryside of England to the entire world, with Araki showing his penchant for globetrotting early on. Lasting 69 chapters and around 7 volumes, the story is also a bit longer than Phantom Blood, and its threats and storyline are a bit more elaborate, following the awakening of the Pillar Men, the original creators of the Stone Mask, who are fearsome apex predators and seemingly much stronger than any threat Dio presented. I still feel like Dio is a better and more charismatic villain though, but the Pillowmen are still a lot of fun and harbour a whole host of weird powers. What has definitely improved though is the sidecast, with Caesar being an obvious highlight for many and the first true Jobro, I think. I also think this is where JoJo starts to really revel in its fashion influence, which you can see throughout its characters' outfits, as well as its colour pages, which feature even more homages and influence from Araki's favourite designers and artists like Antonio Lopez. The art overall is as beautiful as ever, and I think Araki stepped up his game, though it still has this early JoJo look which I'd equate to older 80s manga, which I personally really love. Frankly, I'm pretty amazed at all the detail in a lot of pages and spreads. Another thing I think got better is the fights, in large part because Joseph is a great tactician, being able to outwit opponents and make jokes at their expense while fighting. Unlike his grandfather, he also isn't afraid to play dirty or be a bit more creative. One element that surprised me while reading was actually the horror elements this time around. I felt the build up to the Pillowmen and the situations they were shown in, especially initially with Santana, reminded me of some sci-fi horror movies like Alien. There's something so creepy and almost Lovecraftian about the setup, with these sleeping monstrous men, and the art reflects that too, with the weird egg-like walls they're stuck in. The cosmic horror as well of facing these higher beings which see you as prey is also pretty spooky, and I don't think Araki gets enough credit for his portrayal of this. Overall, Battle Tendency is a great evolution of JoJo, adding to the series' mythos, presenting an extremely lovable sidecast and improving on the writing, the comedy and horror elements especially, and I can see why people love it so much. I still like Phantom Blood more though, but this was an absolute joy to read for the first time instead of watching. JoJo is one of my favourites for good reason. Every single part is great, and we'll get to go through many of them throughout these Jump retrospective videos. Battle Tendency would also have a kind of side novel called George Joestar, focusing on Joseph's father growing up in the Canary Islands. This is widely known to be pretty wacky and I think non-canon, but is something I'd love to read someday. Battle Tendency also got animated alongside Part 1 by David Production in 2012, and characters from the part have appeared in all manner of JoJo games and other projects since, although I do feel like, as a part, it's the one that's often least touched upon by supplemental media.
Run for your life! Oh man, I knew you were gonna do that!
Cosmos Striker would be the first brand new manga to kick off the year, being 13 chapters and 2 volumes long by Seiichi Tanaka and Shingo Todate. This would immediately differentiate itself from the other sports manga in the magazine, including Captain Tsubasa, by being a much more fantastical soccer or football manga. You see, in 1992, half of the world's entire population was involved with football, and it had effectively taken over the world thanks to the shady machinations of a group called the Third Envy, who may or may not be related to the Nazis. Or that might just be how the German team is depicted, since that was a pretty common trope for Japanese media at the time. But it gets weirder still, as to combat the Third Envy, we have the Tokyo Cosmos, a team of players chosen by God, who all possess football-shaped birthmarks on their chest. These players are comprised of mostly missing people of various professions, like athletes, a karate professional, and even an actor, but they've all come together to free the world from the Third Envy's tyranny by playing the most brutal games of football you've ever seen. Like its likely influence Astro Kyudan, this is a less typical sports game and more battle focused, with players having special moves, which veer into the territory of creating things like black holes. Also, some teams don't even bother to score, but try to just eliminate the opposing team instead, going for a so-called 0-point victory, which is allowed since teams with less than 7 players are disqualified, which actually seems to happen to our main squad at some point. Cosmos Striker sounds absolutely insane, and in line with some of the other manga at the time, like JoJo, Godsider, and Fist of the North Star, but for whatever reason, people liked their sport to be fairly grounded in this period, it seems. The gorgeous art couldn't save this one, which is a shame since it looks great and would have been a wild ride if it was allowed to keep going. Haruka Kanata is next, which is another sports manga, but this time it's less fantastical and about baseball. Lasting 20 chapters and 3 volumes by Ryo Watanabe, despite being a volume longer than Cosmos Striker, there really isn't much to say about this one. The two main characters, Haruka and Yuta, grew up together like brother and sister after they survived a plane crash, but nothing much is explored through this. There might be a slight romance aspect, but it got muddled with the sports elements, leading it to be a fairly mundane school baseball manga, which eventually got cancelled. Our first new hit of 1988 would be Bastard by Kazushi Hajiwara, which has been on hiatus for many years now, but is still technically an active manga by some definition. Its time in Jump is a bit all over the place, releasing steadily into 1989, but having various hiatuses leading it to be published in special seasonal issues of Jump throughout the 90s, where it would return to the magazine again briefly at the end of the decade before moving to Ultra Jump. It's quite frankly a pretty wild manga to have in Jump anyway, firstly being a dark fantasy manga, more reminiscent of Western stories and Dungeons and Dragons, which had its fair share of popularity in Japan, but it wasn't too common to see a manga like this in Jump. What's more, Bastard doesn't follow some goody two-shoes swordsman or martial artist like a lot of other shonen manga, but an evil wizard called Dark Schneider. Dash is such an interesting character, even having this possession thing going on with Lucien, the body he's inhabiting, but this is a plot point I feel gets seldom looked into after a while. It's interesting though, as it blends shonen rom-com elements early on with dark fantasy, and you can see that in the art style too, which is reminiscent of Kimagure Orange Road, of which Hajiwara was an assistant on. One moment you could be having this epic fantasy magic battle, and the next you might have some silly joke that you would see in any rom-com of the period, complete with chibi characters and goofy expressions. Bastard actually has a great sense of humor, and it made me laugh out loud a lot, especially with its meta humor, of which there is quite a lot. Hajiwara butting in from time to time reminds me of Aguchi in Stop Hibari-kun, which I also enjoy quite a bit. I understand if others don't like this aspect though, as it could ruin the flow of the story. The artwork also evolves greatly over time, becoming more refined and fantastical, especially in its later chapters, but I'll always have a soft spot for some of the goofier early designs since they feel seeped in 80s manga nostalgia. A large aspect of Bastard that caught me off guard is its eroticism. There's a big difference between its approach compared to a lot of other works at the time, and it's surprisingly adult sometimes in its portrayal of anything sexual. There is of course tropes used here and there like groping and stuff, but there's also a lot of time devoted to sensuality, something I don't really expect from a magazine aimed at young boys. Dash has numerous explicit encounters, though Hajiwara usually rides a thin line with nothing actually happening. A great example being a scene early on where a character needs to suck poison from Dash's chest. This part is intoxicating, sexy, and oddly romantic. It's something you'd read in a work of erotic fiction or some gay fanfic on AO3 and not a shonen battle manga, but it gives Dash and the manga as a whole a lot of charm, and for all its missteps and problematic bits, it's surprisingly well handled sexual material has me incredibly impressed. I also really like how it's not just women who are sexualized, Dash is too, with the manga frequently showing off his body, which doesn't seem appropriate for a wizard to have, but I'm not complaining in the slightest. Bastard is such a fun manga to read as well. Seeing Dark Schneider be a bastard is fun. He's petty, a shitty human being, but also infinitely likable. The fights where characters use spells with musical based names which summon giant creatures or cause immense destruction is fun and fresh. I don't think I've seen a battle manga use magic like this. The slow build-up and reveal of Dash's ex-companions and the revival of the dark god Anthrasax is also really cool and creepy, and there's some world-shattering twists the story takes which had me pretty gripped. It's not something I finished reading yet, but it's a manga I have absolutely fallen in love with from this period. Sadly, as I mentioned though, it is on hiatus, but you can read it. Though the license from Viz Media was cancelled a while back, so getting any physicals will be tough. Bastard also has multiple one-shots and side stories, or alternate retellings, with its original one-shot being a prequel or just the first chapter essentially, and some of the one-shots are just straight up hentai doujinshi of the series created by Hajiwara himself, which I think is fitting and pretty cool. Bastard also had a 6-episode OVA in 1992, which aesthetically looks right up my alley. 90s fantasy anime just rules. But if you'd like something a bit longer and more modern, there's the 2022 adaptation that spans 24 episodes, which has an additional season of 15, which I've heard is quite good and should be pretty accessible. Bastard has also received a ton of drama CDs, patchy slots, and a few video game adaptations, with a planned MMO being in the works at some point, but it seemingly got cancelled. It's also been quite influential, with it heavily influencing Daisuke Ishiwatari, the creator of Guilty Gear, and overall influencing Guilty Gear. It's super obvious after playing the games and reading Bastard. The characters mirror each other to an extent, with Sol and Dash, as well as Kai and Cal. Both are also heavy on the musical references, often referencing the same metal bands and songs, and their settings are remarkably similar, both being post-apocalyptic worlds, melding magic and sci-fi elements, and overall, both are just cool as fuck. And we would then see a back-to-back hit with Jungle King Ta-chan by Masayo Tokuhiro, lasting 112 chapters and 7 volumes. This was a gag comedy manga that usually had around 7 pages per chapter, and followed Ta-chan, who grew up as a lost child in the jungles of Africa, being looked after by its various animal inhabitants. But we follow him years later as he's the established king of the jungle and protector of the local wildlife. Basically, it's a Tarzan parody, which wouldn't be complete without Jane, who is an ex-supermodel but is now super obese, and Ta-chan won't let you forget about that because there's a fat joke in pretty much every chapter. Ta-chan runs the gambit of having some pretty tame and fun animal jokes, with a lot of wordplay, gross out humor and poop jokes, lots, and I mean lots, of penis jokes, some of which I could classify as body horror, and also some pretty unsavory racial jokes, but they're mostly contained to its earlier chapters. As a manga, it's a mixed bag, though as much as I dislike a lot of its humor, sometimes it can be funny, and Jane and Ta-chan are really fun characters, despite the whole fat thing going on. I like their dynamic a ton. Since this has a full translation, you can read all 112 chapters, and it's a very interesting experience getting to read an older gag manga like this in full. One thing I like about Ta-chan Ta-chan is the art. The way Messiah draws characters is just a lot of fun, and a whole lot of quirky people show up throughout its run. I'm also really intrigued by its sequel, New Jungle King Ta-chan, which upped the page count and focused more on battle elements, leading to it getting an extra 20 volumes, but we'll discuss that a bit more in 1990. For now though, consider it one of Jump's big gag manga that was popular throughout the late 80s into the 90s.
I would be a wolf-lion hybrid mix. King of the jungle, but still social and with it.
Second by Yasuki Inoue lasted 1 volume and 6 chapters, which could possibly make it one of the shortest cancellations the magazine's ever had, although it may also just be a short work. It followed a second called Seiji Omatsu for Arakura Gym, a second basically being the corner person who makes sure boxers are okay and that fairness and safety is maintained. It took an episodic approach and was very mature, probably too mature for the magazine, which explains its short run, as it went into boxing with a lot more realism than other works that popped up in Jump, with it possibly even referencing other boxers in memoriam near the end. One of the chapters seemed to delve into weight brackets, with one boxer giving in to the temptation of coke, the drink, not the drug, and just a small drink was all it took for them to be disqualified. It had a really interesting premise, but as most seem to say, it felt very ill-fitting for the magazine and would have done much better elsewhere. Kami-sama Wa Southpaw would be Shinji Imaizumi's follow-up to his 1986 hit Sorry no Canvas, lasting 109 chapters and 12 volumes. Similarly to his last work, it would be a human drama with sports theming, focusing on boxing this time, with Dan Hayasaka being our main character, a boy whose left fist possesses divine power. With it, he aims to become the world champion of boxing, which is something his father could never achieve. Alongside this, there also might be a romantic side plot involving Dan's childhood friend, who is the daughter of Dan's father's rival, so possibly there's a lot of intergenerational relationships and family drama. For a series that actually did quite well in Jump and seemed to be beloved at first glance, this was extremely hard to find anything about, which is something I haven't run into for a while now. In 2009, it would receive a sequel or spin-off in Kami-sama Wa Southpaw Diamond, lasting 3 volumes. It followed a new character with a very different art style since Imaizumi had decades to change his art and moved on to making manga for seinen magazines. Hengen Sennin Asuka would be Yoshihiro Kuroiwa's longest work in Jump, coming in at 18 chapters and 2 volumes, and he would return to his roots to do another ninja-based manga like Sasuke Nindan, but this time the protagonist would be Asuka Honoji, a ditzy girl and ninja who guards the tomb of an ancient evil threat, but that quickly goes awry when the Tsuchigumo ninja clan attacks, overpowering her, unleashing Ranmaru, their leader, who has the power to unleash the Demon King. Asuka, faced with overwhelming odds, is joined by her brother, who makes her a superpowered suit, transforming her into Hengen Sennin Asuka, a superpowered ninja with much higher abilities than before at the cost of being scantily clad. And that's the core conceit of the manga, busty ninja girls fighting each other, taking premises Kuroiwa used in prior works but adding way more sex appeal, which worked to an extent as it's on the longer side of cancelled manga from this period, and also received and still might receive a ton of fan art. Apparently hentai doujinshi even exists for this too, which is wild for a cancelled manga, and it even got a re-release with new covers at one point. I personally really like the overall idea, and Asuka's design is super cool, but sadly it couldn't keep up with the other hits of Jump's golden age. Niji no Runner would be Tekuchiba's final shot in Jump and his 4th sports title overall, only lasting 13 chapters and 2 volumes. The sport this time would be running or track and field, which is a pretty unexciting and mundane one when compared to some of the more action-oriented sports like baseball, boxing, and football, which would be popular at this time. In the hectic time of Jump's golden age, where it was brimming with standout works, I think it was a pretty bold choice to be so modest. The story followed a boy named Jiro who was largely ignored by his parents, who gave all their favor to his older brother, a marathon runner. In a depressed haze, he meets a new teacher at his school named Yoko, and with her support, he joins the track and field team and starts running relay races. After that, it's your fairly run-of-the-mill sports drama series that sees Niji get better mentally and at running. A few more characters are introduced so there can be 7 runners for each color of the rainbow, as the translated title would be something like Rainbow Runner. But overall, it's a fairly fairly meek way to end your run in Jump, and ironically, Niji no Runner stands out a bit by being a really mundane manga in a year full of weird ones. When you think of long-running manga in Shonen Jump, one series you might not be aware of is 1988's Rokudenashi Blues by Masanori Morita, lasting 421 chapters and 41 volumes. It ran from this year all the way into 1997 and remained a constant popular series throughout the middle and end of Jump's golden age, although you won't see it talked about as much compared to other Jump classics. This is a big shame since Masanori Morita is a phenomenal mangaka going on to make Rookies after this, but his first foray into Jump ended with him having an exceptionally long and beloved manga focusing on delinquents and boxing. Rocky Blues follows Maeda Tyson, a delinquent boy entering Teiken High School, adamant to himself that he'll become a world champion boxer. The beginning sees him getting into all sorts of trouble, battling with other students and teachers, with him going head to head with members of various clubs like the boxing club. Morita juggles usual delinquent fights, silly gags, and the general struggles and drama of high school youth really well, at a time where, I might add, delinquents weren't prominently featured in Jump much at all, so in some ways this feels a bit like a return to form to the old early 70s, but with a modern coat of paint. I can't speak too much about the actual plot or development of the manga this time, unfortunately, since I haven't read much of it. This video in particular has taken a long time to put together and research, and I don't want to rush through a Masanori Morita manga because I know I will enjoy this, but please take that as an endorsement and my level of faith in Morita because I know he can deliver a good story with great characters. Doing assistant work beforehand on Kinnikuman, the Momotaro, and Fist of the North Star, Morita had plenty of time to study up on other Jump legends and anatomy, which led him to have this really interesting hyper-realistic style that makes his characters and action pop. This is very evident when we see our main character of the manga, Maeda, at the very beginning. Morita uses techniques like hatching to really make certain expressions stand out, and the level of detail in these expressions works really well for the often gritty delinquent story he's trying to tell, but also because I find Morita's writing style really emotional and his characters' faces always portray that too. They do sometimes look quite goofy though, especially early on, but I think that adds to the charm the manga has. Maeda is also a pretty goofy character sometimes too, so it is fitting. It's not often I get to talk about Morita, but I really want to get across how much respect I have for him as an artist. I also think more people in general should read his work, be it the currently fully translated Rookies or what we have of Rokudenashi Blues, which currently sits at 333 chapters out of 421. There's a ways to go, so I hope some group picks it back up so we can see the end of this Jump classic. Rokudenashi Blues would also receive a 30-minute OVA in 1992 from the 1992 Toei Summer Anime Fair, and the following year saw a full feature film see release too. 1996 would then see its first live-action film adaptation, which would be followed by another, and then a live-action TV series in 2011, lasting 12 episodes. The series has also received plenty of things like stage plays, CD dramas, games, and patchy slots too, showing its continued popularity and legacy. There also exists a one-shot collection by Morita called Bachi Atari Rock, which features one-shots that inspired Rokudenashi Blues' creation, and there's a short super deformed series called Rokudenashi Baruchu. Overall, it's a widely beloved series in Japan at least, and I wish more people would give it a try, or at least read some of Masanori Morita's works, so please go and read them. Following the end of Ginga in 1987, Yoshihiro Takahashi would try another dog-based battle manga in Jump with Kachuu no Senshi Gamu, or Armored Fighter Gamu, lasting 16 chapters and 2 volumes. This is a period piece taking place in Sengoku-era Japan, even including some real historical figures like Nobunaga in some less realistic dog-based shenanigans, because of course it wouldn't be a Yoshihiro Takahashi manga without his beloved dogs. Like Ginga, this sets it apart from a lot of other battle manga at the time, since it followed animals in large part instead of humans, although the human component in Gamu is much bigger than Ginga, and there's this whole deal that these dogs are trained ninjas with telepathic powers that can also use swords and ride horses. It's absolutely insane, but Takahashi is so used to drawing dogs in wild poses that all the fights come across as very natural and enjoyable. Some of the concepts Gamu puts forward are very bizarre. The main character, Rando, is a ninja boy who can communicate with the dogs telepathically because he also drank the dog's mother's milk when he was a baby like them. Also, at one point, Gamu whips leaves up into the air and uses them as footholds in an air battle. And speaking of air-related dog feats, there's also these flying kamikaze dogs that show up at one point. Kachuu no Senshi Gamu is one of the wildest jump manga I've ever had the pleasure of reading, and usually I'm not very fond of feudal Japanese settings, but the addition of talking ninja dogs really elevates it to something special. I think it also flirts with battle shonen ideas more than Ginga that can feel somewhat modern at times, like the whole leaves incident. Its beginning chapters are quite well paced and intriguing too, which makes its swift acts even more of a disappointment, since if this did get to last, I would have probably have preferred it to Ginga. Thankfully, if anyone would like to read this, it has a full translation, and I'd recommend it if you'd like a weird slice of Jump history. Dance Sailor Suit Knight lasted 12 chapters and 2 volumes by Teruto Haruka. This would be a short-lived transformation style battle series that was a bit different to the earlier mentioned Hengen Sennin Asuka. It followed Maiko, a girl born to 2 wrestlers who possesses extraordinary strength. But as much as she wants to live a normal life, she has to battle evils around her school to keep it safe. To do so, she would wear a disguise and become the Sailor Suit or Bloomer Knight. And it seemed to be fairly episodic, with Maiko taking out various different school-related threats in every chapter. Despite its short run, it seems Teruto Haruka really likes this story, as it's seen multiple spin-offs or continuations, with him still drawing the character, or potentially even more manga to this day.
窓を開ければ鼻毛は抜いたし
生きててよかった人生雲ある気だるい午後には
どいつもこいつもこちとら江戸っ子バカバカバカバカワンレンボデコン火曜日発売
Following up the smashing success of Captain Tsubasa, Yoichi Takahashi would venture out of his comfort zone of football, which he would rarely do, to do a tennis manga called The Legend of Sho. It would only last 25 chapters and 3 volumes though, getting nowhere near the level of success as Tsubasa. Sho starts off with Sho, a 5-year-old who enjoys tennis, and his alcoholic father who is still grieving over the death of Sho's mother. However, seeing his son excel at tennis, he decides to drop the bottle and pick up the sport and train Sho, making the series a father-son sports manga. It juggled this for a while with the two going through matches and tournaments, but eventually a twist happens. Stricken by grief after a rough loss, Sho's father snaps, and it's revealed that he isn't Sho's biological father. He can't handle seeing him grow up looking more and more like his late wife, having abandoned his dreams to be with her, and with her being gone, he feels like he has nothing left, and so he abandons Sho. Time skips 5 years into the future where Sho is 10 now. He's a lot more distant and angry looking, and he probably needs therapy, but more rivals and characters are introduced, with more human drama elements being present as well. But it didn't matter because seemingly that twist doomed Sho from getting its planned long run. From what I can tell, it wasn't very well received, as it was something that shocked people and they didn't expect it from Takahashi or a Jump manga. It was a very bold play, but one that didn't play off, leading to its cancellation. Next up, we have another big hit of 1988 with Magical Talutalo by Tatsuya Egawa, lasting 190 chapters and 21 volumes. Magical Talotalo follows Honmaru Edojo, a 5th grader who has trouble making friends and is bullied at school, but things start to change after he messes with an odd book owned by his father which summons a wizard named Talotalo. Talotalo and Honmaru become fast friends, and the manga sees their relationship grow, while Talotalo helps Edogawa deal with his school troubles. The two also create a lot more trouble as well, as often Talotalo's magic gets a bit out of hand, like when the two basically spawn Godzilla through a combination of various spells, or the time they ride around in an army helicopter throughout the town. It's a very wacky and wild manga, but it embraces this childish whimsy, which is coupled nicely by its genuine friendship between the two characters. There's a sweetness to some of Talotalo's chapters which really gets to me sometimes, since it really nails the sense that Talotalo is helping Honmaru make friends and is improving his life. Talotalo the character is also just really cute. He's silly, childish, and he likes to hug and kiss people. He always means well even if he makes mistakes, and his design is just great. He's a top tier little guy. This is helped a ton by the art too, which is gorgeous. It melds this cute cartoony style with hyper-realistic elements like the helicopter I mentioned earlier to create some great juxtaposition. The facial expressions are delightful, funny, and I love how it's all paneled. It's a really expressive and fun manga. There's also some romance elements to the series too, with Honmaru having a crush on Iona Kawai, his classmate. There's also quite a lot of ecchi elements present as well, which caught me off guard because I thought initially it would just be a very innocent and cute manga, but it isn't. Overall though, I think it's good fun. I managed to read the first 27 chapters through Manga Planet through a subscription back when I read Ginga and Sakigake Otokojuku, which is where it's officially available if you'd like to read it. Magical Talotalo would also receive an 87-episode-long anime adaptation in 1990 and 3 short films, as well as a handful of video games released throughout the early 90s. Talotalo is a wonderful piece of Jump history that I wish was a bit more widespread and accessible because it honestly makes me really happy to read, and I think a lot of people would also enjoy it. After finishing high school Kumengumi, Motoe Shinezawa would set out to do yet another school-based gag manga in Jump, beginning Boku Wa Shitakata-Kun. It ran for 70 chapters and 5 volumes, having roughly 13 pages per chapter, and it seemed to be fairly popular at the time, with it even picking up steam close to its conclusion, but ended prematurely due to Motoe Shinezawa's chronic back pain. Like his previous works, it's set in high school, with the characters being less one-note than before, and jokes shifting away from puns to more slapstick and absurd humor. The titular Tataka being a prime example of this, being a somewhat stern small boy who wears a leather jacket and seems rather tough. He also has immense strength for his age, which presumably feeds into a lot of slapstick gags. The series would introduce plenty of weird and wacky characters as it went on, with them joining Tataka in his antics, which usually involved doing the usual high school things like baseball matches and school plays. Next we have Kyoryu Daikoku, or Dinosaurs Journey, by Daimuro Kishi, lasting 12 chapters and 1 volume, and this is a documentary-style dinosaur manga. It seems to try to emulate the feel of someone going back in time and reporting the events, though there aren't any characters or plot elements related to this, it's just how the stories are framed. The dinosaurs also seem to communicate too with speech bubbles, so it isn't just David Attenborough-style facts. There are narratives running through each chapter too, even if they just mostly serve to teach readers about the time period and the dinosaurs themselves. The artwork is very detailed and a lot less stylized than what you'd see from all the other manga in Jump at the time, making it stand out a lot. It really feels like an educational kids picture book, and it reminds me of some of the dinosaur books I'd read when I was younger. It also didn't pull its punches and fully dived into the dinosaurs killing to eat each other, which is depicted pretty gruesomely at points. Some chapters also didn't cover dinosaurs at all and veered into more general ecology of the time periods, with sea life like ammonites being shown. And the final chapter, predictably, was about the mass extinction event at the end of the Cretaceous period when the meteorite hit the Earth. It's an absolutely fascinating manga that even captivated other mangaka like Masanori Morita and Akira Toriyama, who praised it highly. This also has an English release. It's of a full color version though, which made some changes here and there. I'm glad it has a translation, although it almost escaped me since it's not very well documented despite being on Amazon for a pretty fair price. While the coloring is nice too, I do really like the black and white of the original, but I won't complain too much since it's rare older cancel manga like this get any translation. It's a shame it didn't go on longer, luckily because it was just an oddball of a manga and too experimental, but it would have appealed to children and even adults, I think, as dinosaurs are a pretty universally beloved and interesting topic. Cyber Blue by Tetsuo Hara, the artist of Fist of the North Star, and Ruichi Matsui, as well as Bob, is a science fiction dystopia series following a cyborg man named Blue, who is the combination of a 17-year-old boy and a 300-year-old robot called Fatso that is trying his best to take down the corrupt government on a far-out human colony on the planet of Tinos. It sounds much sillier with me saying it than in writing, but it's honestly a really serious story and not really comedic at all. Originally, I thought this would be more of a cyberpunk story going in, and while it possesses certain elements like cyber augmentation, the sale of basic human needs through the life support systems necessary to live on the planet due to its harsh atmosphere, and in general it having an overall disdain for the police and people of power, it was a lot more science fiction and space focused than I first thought. It would be a bit too simplistic to say it's just Fist of the North Star in space though, although the art is here and we have a masculine but emotive figure in Blue to guide us. The world building is dense but bleak. Early on, you'll see children selling drugs for money just so they can afford a life support system. And when things do get dicey and Blue has to fight, guns are the primary mode of fighting, and it gets brutal. Cyber Blue has all the charm and explosive violence of an 80s action film, and the translation, faithfully or otherwise, hones in on explicit dialogue, which really makes some of the scenes pop. How can you not love when the main character says, "Prepare to shit your brains out of your ass, fuck you, bastard," and then he blows someone's head off. This then balances really well with the surprising amount of pensive moments Cyber Blue has. Often at the end or middle of a chapter, you'll get a page of just environment, a lonely futuristic city put there to help you reflect on events that have just passed. Often this involves Blue remarking about how unfair life is on Tinos and how the people in charge need to pay for their crimes. There's a point early on where he remarks that the people who hurt him prior aren't his real enemies, but those who control the current system are, and I just love how prescient that is since it still holds up to this day. Blue also approaches others much like Kenshiro. He's a kind character who you want to root for, but he's also a huge chunk of destructive man or robot meat who's going to blow shit up, which is always cool. I really feel that this is an underrated hidden gem of 80s Jump. It has great art, a cool world which we don't see much in the magazine, being a sci-fi dystopia, and it's quite mature in its content and overall themes. That's partially why I can understand that it didn't last as long as Fist of the North Star. Jump heroes don't tend to blow people's heads off with guns, and toppling governments would become much more common from 1997 onward with One Piece. With that said, it lasted 31 chapters and 4 volumes, which for the Golden Age is a good run, and all of this is fully translated should you want to read, and I heavily encourage you to as well. Cyber Blue also got some love a few decades later in 2010 with Cyber Blue Ushinawareta Kodomotachi, a reimagining of the manga. And now that we've seen all the new manga that have begun in 1988, let's compare how the magazine was at the beginning and end of the year to see how things have changed and how healthy it was. We begin our roster this time with our usual Golden Age heroes: Dragon Ball, Fist of the North Star, City Hunter, and Saint Seiya. We also have more battle shonen in the form of Sakigake Otokojuku, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure now in part 2, and God Cider. Captain Tsubasa and Yamashita Taro-kun are still the magazine's 2 big sports titles, and for comedy we have Kochikame, Sude ni Tonshinkan, Moraru Onisan, and the Momotaro. Yude Tamago's second manga, Yude Kozo Yate Kita, is in the middle of its run here, and the rest of the magazine is actually filled with a lot of duds. Otoboke Nako-sensei being the only non-sports one, with Hard Luck being a cancelled boxing manga. And the newly added Cosmo Striker and Haruka Kanata would see football and baseball flops join the magazine briefly too, early on in the beginning of the year. While we have a lot of heavy hitters, still I do think there's been a notable decline in hits, and even looking at the new comedy manga, they wouldn't last quite as long, but that's why 1988 is here, to fill the magazine back up with great manga. First of all, Cosmo Striker, Haruka Kanata, Hard Luck, Otoboko Nako-sensei, and Yurekozo would all come to an end, cutting the chaff from the magazine. Godsider would also conclude with the rising popularity of JoJo, and we would see the end of two major hits in 1988. Firstly, Captain Tsubasa, which had gone on almost the entire decade, would come to its conclusion with the first International Junior Youth Tournament in France ending, with the All Japan Junior Youth team beating West Germany in the finals, solidifying Tsubasa's legend and seeing him off to go to Brazil to train. The other manga to end would be Fist of the North Star, arguably the most influential work of its time alongside Dragon Ball. It brought an era of manliness to the magazine, but also provided an emotionally captivating character in Ken who would inspire many mangaka to come. Jump wouldn't die without these works, but it certainly left big spaces to fill, so what exactly did 1988 bring? Although it's not as well known, I think the new star of 1988 would be Masanori Morita's debut in Jump, Rokudenashi Blues, which we would see in the magazine for the next decade. While it wouldn't be quite as long, Kami-sama Wa Southpaw would be another boxing manga that seemed to do really well in the magazine at this time. Bastard would also be a major player, attempting fantasy and ecchi when there really wasn't much of that in the magazine at all. And similarly, Magical Talo Talo would mix ecchi but with comedy and slice of life elements, with both being solid hits for the magazine going into the next decade. Jungle King Ta-chan would be the newest gag manga mega hit, going on to last an exceptionally long time in the magazine, and Shitataka-kun I feel similarly deserves that label too, despite having a premature end. While not a major hit, Tetsuo Hara, the artist behind Fist of the North Star, would return by the year's end to serialize Cyber Blue, adding sci-fi action to the magazine, and Yoichi Takahashi would return with The Legend of Sho, giving us even more sports. Although these aren't mega hits, they're still from big authors running in the magazine that lasted more than your standard Axe manga, so the magazine overall feels very full. And to top it all off, we have Dinosaurs Journey, which I feel would have lasted a lot longer if the magazine hadn't been reshuffled with iconic manga. So while we dipped a bit in 1987, I firmly believe that once again Jump had reached a peak in its roster, with almost everything being a hit from a big author. I don't think you can really get any better than this, but you'll have to tune in next time to find out about what's next for Jump's future. But before we end today and tackle Dragon Ball, we have a couple more Akira Toriyama one-shots that came out in 1988, The Elder and Little Mamejiro. These can be read in Akira Toriyama's Manga Theatre, an exceptional hardcover book filled with his old one-shots, which are a ton of fun to read. We covered Mr. Ho back in the 1986 video, but I missed Young Master Kenosuke from last year too. All of them are in this one volume though, which you can read on the Shonen Jump app, and I'd highly recommend it. These are all really short too, only being around 17 pages, so there's not much to say other than that they both feature Toriyama's amazing artwork, which is so expressive and vibrant. His ideas are a ton of fun too, with The Elder being about this cranky old village elder who makes sure the town is safe, but gets a bit too into his role. And Little Mamejiro is equally as absurd, following this cute little guy who gets really angry his dad stole his ice cream, so he goes and flips his car. It cannot be stated enough how amazing Toriyama's works are, and this extends to his short stories too, so please go and read them. We're back to Dragon Ball, and it's in its final stages before the Z portion of the story, where we'll be covering chapters 135 to 194 of the manga. We begin with Demon King Piccolo, who has plans to take out people who threaten his rule, that being strong fighters and most of Goku's friends. He intends to collect the 7 Dragon Balls to regain his youth in an attempt to get even stronger. We then get a few quick fights with Goku fighting Piccolo's lackeys, Tambourine and Drum, as well as meeting a new friend, Yajirobe, who I won't mention much because quite frankly I find him really annoying. There's quite a lot of back and forth early on of multiple characters trying to defeat Piccolo, including Tenshin Han and Master Roshi, but it's split up with a training section for Goku, and with his newfound powers, he enters the final battle with a full-strength Piccolo who has acquired the Dragon Balls and has destroyed them, so there's no easy way out of this fight. The fight itself is pretty good, there's a good back and forth, there's lots of big impact hits, injuries, and I really like the support from Tenshin Han. His relationship with Goku is really interesting, and I wish it was explored a bit more. Eventually though, Piccolo gets his hands on Ten and uses him as a hostage, forcing Goku to just stand there as Piccolo slowly whittles him down by throwing rocks at him. Eventually, Piccolo lets his guard down though, and it all comes down to one final attack. As both rush through the air, Goku ends up flying straight through Piccolo, saving the day, although his son or clone, Piccolo Jr., vows to avenge his father and end all peace eventually. Goku is then told that he needs to meet God if he wants any hope at restoring Krillin's life, so he decides that's what he needs to do, and he meets and fights Mr. Popo, and then meets God, who coincidentally looks like Piccolo. This is Piccolo's other half, or good half, and he requires Goku stay and train a bit more in exchange for granting Goku's plea to resurrect Shenlong, which he does. Krillin and the other fighters then revive, and the Dragon Balls return and are spread out into the world. 3 years pass of training, and we get the reunion of all our friends, including our first instance of the Goku we all know and love today, who's gained some considerable height. Of course, we've reunited for yet another Tenkaichi Budokai, but this time Piccolo Jr. enters the fray. Chi-Chi is also here, who Goku doesn't recognize, and neither do we, which is something I find a bit funny. Goku, Krillin, Piccolo, and Yamcha all beat their first match with ease, but Chaozu is taken out by none other than Tao Pai Pai, making our 8 finalists Tao Pai Pai, Tenshin Han, Goku, Chi-Chi, Piccolo, Krillin, Yamcha, and this normal looking guy called Shen. Ten vs Tao Pai Pai and Goku vs Chi-Chi are both pretty fun fights with great art, with Goku winning his by proposing marriage, which I think is pretty funny and cute. It's a shame again that not much is built up relationship-wise between these two. Krillin vs Piccolo is another great fight that sees Krillin try to avenge his own death, and he gives it a damn good go, but bails out after suffering too much damage. Our mysterious fighter this time, Shen, goes up against Yamcha, and this fight I always liked a lot, since Shen's design is just some normal-ass guy who has this really funny accidental style of fighting. The pencil mustache definitely makes me think of Charlie Chaplin too, so I wonder if this fight and comedy style were inspired by him. Shen does get serious though, and I love his line about Yamcha basing assumptions of him on his appearance, thoroughly humbling and thrashing Yamcha in the process. And then we get Goku vs Tenshin Han. The two have been neck and neck throughout this saga as kind of rivals, and their brawl doesn't disappoint. It's a good rival fight, one of many more to come, but I love their back and forth, and Goku taking off all the weights is classic shonen, and it's just great. Him then overpowering Ten and using his own special move against him to help him win the fight is also really cool. Shen vs Piccolo is a weird fight with two characters you wouldn't expect to interact, but it's all part of the plan, as Shen is actually Kami-sama or God from earlier, here to seal Piccolo away, though Piccolo manages to turn that against him, sealing Kami-sama away, leaving the last person capable of defeating him to be Goku. And I'm gonna sound like a broken record, but 1988 saw Dragon Ball have yet another brilliant and climactic fight between Goku and a big bad. This one really comes down to the wire, as both Goku and Piccolo are battered and bruised after a huge back and forth of special moves and tests of strength. But despite that and the huge level of destruction done by Piccolo, Goku does edge out the victory via a headbutt, which knocks Piccolo out of bounds, crowning him the champion of the Budokai. Kami-sama then says he feels unfit to be God, not being able to stop Piccolo himself, but the very Dragon Balls he created enabled Goku and friends to embark on their journeys and meet each other, and this is where I feel like the title of Dragon Ball is really earned. These balls, don't you dare laugh. These balls form connections between people and have been a source of promoting near endless growth in Goku. I'm not sure if it was ever fully planned out like this, but after rereading I have a much bigger respect for them and Dragon Ball overall. And this is also where Goku's youth ends, and for many the end of original Dragon Ball. It was never fully segmented this way, but next time we'll move on to the Z portion of the story, which will be filled with a lot more iconic characters, and Toriyama's signature comedy takes more of a backseat as a masterful battle shonen formula begins to rear its head. And that was Shonen Jump in the year 1988, a frankly exhausting year, but one full of great and exciting debuts, probably one of the best we've ever had. This is possibly a sign of what's to come, although as the golden age goes into overdrive and enters the 90s, videos may get longer and take more time to make, so please subscribe and make sure you don't miss the next one, and also consider supporting me on Patreon so I can devote more time to research and making these videos faster as well as better. 1989 will be our last stop before we hop decades again, and it's going to be a doozy. It's filled with debuts from some really big mangaka, including Inoue, Togashi, and Obata, as well as some returning faces and a few really big hits, which I know people have been waiting for a while. But for now, consider checking out the rest of the channel if you haven't already. I have history videos going back all the way to Shonen Jump's beginning in 1968, but if you like modern manga as well, I also have a series on Shonen Jump's cancelled manga called The X-Files, as well as many other videos you'll probably be into. Going back to the Patreon, I'd be super grateful to anyone who chooses to support me. You'll get access to some cool stuff, including exclusive polls, a Patreon-only podcast where I frequently talk about manga as well as other media I enjoy, and if you join at the $3 tier or higher, you'll get a little doodle like Kinocha, Jade, Kaizoku Gairu, Soraquil Zero, Holly the Apothecary, Mayu, It's Fako, Yellowtail, Lay Sloggett, Crispy Bacon, Cho Henshin, Full Metal, and also AB at the $1 tier. Thank you all so much for being patrons. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Remember to be kind and take care.